Good day everyone, my name is ELEUTERIO A. CANOY Jr., taking up Master of Arts in Education, major in Educational Management at RAMON MAGSAYSAY Memorial Colleges under the Graduate School. Today, I will be discussing to you about the philosophy and education, integrating curriculum, teaching, and learning as requirements in my subject in Advanced Philosophy under Dr. Lyndon Keynes. Before I will proceed to my main topic, let me define to you first what is philosophy, what is education, and what is the connection of philosophy to education. Now, what is philosophy? Philosophy is the study of fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline, while education is the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction. Now, what is the relation between the two? Philosophy and education are two different fields of studies, but they are closely linked together. Because without any rational thinking prior to education, the whole educational process is directionless. Education in every society is directed for specific aims and objectives, and that aims and objectives are set by a philosophical approach. Now let's proceed to our main topic, which is on how to integrate the philosophy and education to curriculum, teaching, and learning. The practice of philosophy in the classroom places emphasis on process or building a community of inquiry where the teacher's role is one being a facilitator rather than an all-knowing expert. Many of you by now be familiar with what is commonly referred to as procedural questions or Socratic questions. These questions are important insofar as conducting a community of inquiry is concerned. They assist the community to make reasonable judgments through the exploration of underlying assumptions in the structure of our thinking. Socratic questions or procedural questions are open-ended questions which are intended to elicit views and stimulate further inquiry. These types of questions are frames which can be applied across disciplines and subject matter as the context can be filled out. But Socrates, however, also asks open substantive questions. In traditional classrooms, children rarely get the opportunity to reflect upon open substantive questions. In classroom where philosophy is practiced, the opportunity to explore such questions inherent within the mechanisms of the community of inquiry where students are encouraged to formulate and ask substantive questions. Now, substantive questions require a deeper understanding of the subject matter as well as the context of the conversation. In other words, the use of substantive questions requires some knowledge of how, when, and where to ask such questions. To deeply understand the difference between the Socratic or procedural questions and substantive questions, I have here a graph showing their differences. So first, in procedural questions, it engages participants in thinking and inquiry, while in substantive questions, it adds new ideas and content. Next, in procedural questions, Socratic questions aim at encouraging inquiry, while in substantive questions, it follow-up questions. Next, in procedural questions, questions which probe underlying structure of thinking and assist in making reasonable judgments. In substantive questions, it grows out of understanding of a discipline, subject, or domain. including understanding of method, responses, and history of discipline. Next, in procedural questions, it stimulates further inquiry, while in substantive questions, it directs discussion in a subtle direction. Next, in procedural questions, schema or frame filled by reference to particular subject matter, while in substantive questions, it embedded within specific context. Lastly, in procedural questions, teacher models procedures of inquiry, while in substantive questions, teacher is involved as co-inquirer but displays scholarly ignorance. Example, no claim to the answer in advance but engaged in genuine dialogue. Now let us proceed to answer the question, how much knowledge by the discipline of philosophy does facilitator need? It would appear that one may benefit greatly from an understanding of the key ideas within philosophy. So as to make such questioning possible, one needs to be educated in the discipline. It was the asking of both procedural and substantive questions that has contributed to the development of philosophy. As Peter and Sharp state that through example and practice, both teachers and students can gain understanding of how and when to ask substantive questions. Now let's go to strand and subdiscipline of philosophy. On the table is a summary of the strands or subdisciplines which structured the philosophical inquiry. As you notice, there are two strands, the metaphysics and epistemology. Metaphysics, or the nature of things, is the way we think about the world. Metaphysics attempts to get behind appearances and find out the truth about nature of things. Example questions of metaphysics are, what is ultimately real? Why does whatever is real exist? And what is the place of human beings in the world? Now in epistemology, or knowing about things, ask questions about the nature and grounds of knowledge and the conditions by which we assert things to be true or false. The example questions of epistemology are, what is knowledge? What is it to know something? What are human beings capable of knowing? How can we justify our claims to knowledge? Are there limits to human knowledge? If there are limits, what are they, and what fixes them? There are other strands drawn up: the ethics, social and political philosophy, and aesthetics. We have called asking questions about. These strands are underpinned by metaphysical and epistemological considerations. Now, in the table, it is here the strand, the ethics of valuing things. It is a form of values inquiry that grapples with questions that arise from interpersonal relationships and relationships between persons in the non-human world. Also, it concerned about questions of right and wrong, the good and the bad, and the nature of our belief, such as matters. The example questions of ethics are, how ought we to live? What do moral concepts like good and right mean? Are our moral judgments objectively true or false, or do they express subjective preferences? Can specific moral rules be justified? What motives do we have for living morally? How should I balance the pursuit of my own goals with making a contribution to my community? That is all about the ethics. Next, we have social and political philosophy, individuals and communities. It examines the relationship between individuals and communities, as well as those questions that underline our thinking about social, cultural, and political institutions. So what are the example questions in social and political philosophy? Those are, or the examples are, how do we connect with others? How should we organize society? What is the relation of power to law? Who should rule? What is the nature and purpose of law? That's all about the social and political philosophy. Now, let's go to the last strand, which is aesthetics, or philosophy and the arts. It is a form of values inquiry that makes possible judgments of appreciation. What are the example questions in aesthetics? These are the example. What is beauty? Are aesthetic judgments objectively true or false, or do they express subjective preferences? That is all about, and those things are all about the other strands of metaphysics and epistemological. Now lastly, let's proceed to construction and evaluation of arguments. When we engage in the practice of philosophical inquiry and we propound a particular view, in order to defend this position, we must present arguments intended to support this view. The enterprise of reasoning about philosophical issue is known as logic. Logic is a branch of philosophy that involves the construction and evaluation of arguments. So in this table, we have the strand of logic or judgment and reasoning. It deals with rules and procedures that underlie inquiry, the study of valid inference. Embraces both critical and creative thinking. The sample question in logic is, how can we distinguish better reasoning from worse? The next table that I'll be showing to you is called the mapping the subdisciplines of philosophy. In this table, it will show the question that can possibly created if we merge the different subdisciplines of philosophy to each other. So let's start with metaphysics to metaphysics. What is the possible questions that will be created? And it is, what is? Or what things exist? Next, we have metaphysics to epistemology. The questions that will be possibly created is, what is knowledge? Next, metaphysics to social and aesthetics is the question that will be created is, what is beauty? Next, logic to metaphysics, the question will be, what is truth? Next, we have epistemology to epistemology. The possible question would be, is knowledge possible? Then we have also ethics to epistemology. The possible question would be, are our moral judgments objectively true or false? Then we have aesthetics to epistemology. The question is beauty in the eye of the beholder? Next, we have logic to epistemology. The possible question would be, is knowledge related to truth and falsehood? Next, we have ethics to metaphysics, and the question goes like, are there moral truths? Next, we have ethics to epistemology, and the possible question would be, can we show that one moral view is better than another? Then we have ethics to ethics, and the question would be, how ought we to live? Next, we have logic to ethics. The question would be, should my behavior be consistent with my beliefs? Then let's proceed to metaphysics and social and political. The question might be, what does it mean to be a member of a political community? And then let's proceed to ethics and social and political. The possible question would be, do we have an obligation to obey the state? Next, we have social and political to social and political. The possible question would be, how do we connect with others? Then next we have aesthetics and social and political. The question would be, should art be politically correct? Then we have logic to social and political. The possible question might be, is liberty compatible with equality? Next we have metaphysics to aesthetics. Is there such a thing as beauty? Then let's proceed to epistemology to aesthetics. The question would be, how do we judge beauty? Then we have aesthetics to aesthetics. What things are beautiful? Then let's proceed to metaphysics to logic. What do we mean when we say statement is truth? Then, for epistemology to logic, the question might be, how do we decide whether or not a statement is true? Then lastly, we have logic to logic. The question might be, how can we distinguish better reasoning from worse? Now let's proceed to philosophy and studies of society and environment. Philosophy relates in some way to all 8 key learning areas. Generally speaking, every discipline presupposes answers to philosophical questions that cannot be answered by the disciplines themselves. So here are some examples. In mathematics, the possible question is, do numbers exist? Is mathematics discovered or invented? In science, there's also a question goes like, what is scientific knowledge? How is scientific knowledge different from knowledge in other disciplines? In religion, the question is, does God exist? What is the relation between faith and reason? In language, we have also in language, the question is, what is meaning? How does language relate to the world? So I will be showing to you a table entitled Key Values, which is also falls on integrating curriculum. So we have here 5 categories. We have democratic processes, social justice, ecological and economic sustainability, peace, and questions overlapping one or more key values. So each of those key values have an example of questions. In democratic process, the question is, what is a democracy? Does democracy imply respecting the integrity and the rights of all people? If so, is democracy possible in pluralist society? Then what is the relation between democracy and civil and political rights? Another question would be, should all people be involved in democratic decision making in all aspects of life? Then we have also, if yes, can we respect the rights of all people and promote equal participation and access for individuals and groups? If not, what does it mean to be a citizen in a democratic society? Next, we have in social justice, the question would be, what is social justice? What are some ways in which we might challenge injustices? Is it possible to share a common humanity and value diversity? Should all people have a right to equitable treatment? What role do human rights play, if any, in achieving social justice? What do we mean by the term rights? Does social justice entail a fair allocation of community resources? The last one would be, what do we mean by fairness? Is justice fairness? Then next we have ecological and economic sustainability. The question would be, what is the nature of the interrelationship between ecological system and economies? What do we mean by the integrity of natural environments? Can natural environments have intrinsic value or inherent worth, or do they have value or worth because they are important as the basic resources of life? That is for ecological and economic sustainability. Next, let's go with peace. The question is the promotion of positive relations with others and with the environment integral to peace? If so, is it possible to act out of self-interest and yet achieve cooperative and peaceful relations with others? Is the promotion of spirituality and optimism necessary to peace? Can we have peace without a sense of belonging in local, national, and global communities? If so, is a sense of shared destiny and stewardship of the earth necessary for peace? Then let's go to the last. which is questions overlapping one or more key values. First is we have, is democracy possible without social justice? Can we have social justice without democracy? What is the relationship between citizenship and democratic processes? Can we have citizenship without rights or responsibilities? Or how should we decide on what might be a wise, equitable, and sustainable use of resources? Is ecological and economic sustainability necessary for peace? Is peace possible without social justice? And lastly, is democracy necessary for peace? So that's the end of my discussion. Thank you for listening.